Hi, this is Bruce Buffer, your voice of the Octagon, and you're listening to MMA Mental.
Okay, we're now joined by the CCEO of Bellator Fighting Championship, Bjorn Rebney. First of all, I just want to say a massive thank you for agreeing to come on to today's show.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be on.
Oh, I've been really looking forward to speaking with you. Right, just a little bit of information first about your background. Obviously, we all know about Bellator. It's kind of obviously risen up and is now one of the biggest mixed martial arts promotions, not just in the States but in the world. So first of all, what made you want to start a mixed martial arts promotion?
What really made me want to start an MMA promotion was an old saying that my dad used to always share to me when I was a kid. When I was trying to figure out what I was going to do for a living when I was young and where I was going to work, my dad always used to say to me, Bjorn, if you can ever get paid to do what you would otherwise pay to do, you've won in life. And MMA, many years ago, MMA was that thing that I paid to do. I used to buy tickets to events. I used to buy the pay-per-views. I used to buy the old, literally the VHSs from Japan, from the old Pride events. I was just a fan. I loved it. I started training. I just wanted to be around it. I wanted to go to the events. I wanted to be part of it. It was what I did for fun. I would invite my buddies over and we'd order pizza and buy a bunch of cheap beer and we would watch MMA shows. And so, it was a matter of getting together a bunch of expertise that I had in a bunch of different areas in terms of television production, event promotion, marketing, publicity, advertising, international distribution, and then putting all those together and ultimately putting a company together in an area that I loved and that I was a fan of and would give me an opportunity to get paid to do what I used to pay to do.
I've got to say, I love that saying. So if ever you can get paid to do something that you would pay to do, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, you've won.
Yeah, that's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I can see how that would spur you on. Obviously, when you were setting the MMA promotion up, I can imagine you had when you first started out, I imagine you had a lot of doors slammed in your face. So how hard was it to get financial backing to get such a project started?
Oh, it was really difficult. It was extremely difficult. I mean, that's a great question, and it's a question that I very seldom get asked because people just assume that I just put all of this in motion. When you have an idea, when you have a concept, when you're entrepreneurial and you come up with a business idea, trying to get people to put millions upon millions of dollars behind that idea is very, very difficult. That is not easy. I actually went out and did 62 presentations where I would get on cheap flights and rent cheap rental cars and fly all over the country and the world to go and present to investment bank and investment groups and hedge funds and the like, trying to get them to invest in this idea I had back in 2008 for Bellator Fighting Championships. And I got the door shut on me and I was what I like to refer to as pleasantly relentless. I just never stopped. And I kept taking the trips and I kept refining the business plan and I kept answering questions and I kept following up. And finally, in my 63rd trip, an investment bank out of Connecticut in the United States responded positively and liked the concept and the idea. And they asked me how I was based in Southern California at the time. They asked me how quickly I could come out and meet with them. And I told them that I would jump on a red eye that night and I would meet with them the next day. And the next day I arrived in New York at 8 o'clock in the morning and was meeting with them at 2. And that was the beginning of getting the initial financing for Bellator and the beginning of the birth of this company.
I think there's 62 companies now that are absolutely kicking themselves. Wait, how were you ever discouraged? How close were you to just giving up on the whole idea?
Giving up is not a big part of my personality, and I don't think that you can be in this business. This is a hyper competitive, fast paced business. I mean, it's the fight industry, and it's the fight industry from a business perspective. It's also the fight industry in terms of what goes on inside the cage. If giving up or surrendering is part of your personality, it's probably a safe bet that this is not the right business for you. So I was never close to giving up. I put a second on my house, then I put a third on my house. I spent every penny I had in savings, funded the operation, funded my trips, funded the business plan development, funded the video presentation developments, literally took it all on myself because I believed in it 120%. I was also very lucky because I had a beautiful woman that I was dating at the time who later became my wife, who also had complete belief in the idea and the concept and continually said to me, this will work. We'll make this work. This is going to fly. This is going to be awesome. You're going to look back on these days at some point and you're going to just smile because you're going to make this all happen. And so I had a great support system, but I was never close to punting. I was never close to giving up.
Well, on the back of that then, you've got to tell me, how did it feel when you got the yes? After all of these no's, what did it feel like finally to say, someone say, you know what, I like your idea, I want to give it a go? What did that feel like?
You know what? It's funny. It didn't feel as good as you would think because I never assumed that it wouldn't work. It wasn't like one of those moments where you go, oh my God, this is awesome. I always knew that somebody would see the light and would understand that the business model was right and that the projections were right and that this had an opportunity to become something very large. So what it kind of did is it said, okay, the pressure of pitching is off now, and now the pressure of doing is here. So it was almost just like a very brief moment where I went, okay, good enough. I got to that point. Now I have to be ready to do everything I've been talking about doing for the last year plus. So it wasn't one of those moments where you applauded and high-fived. It was just one of those moments where you went, okay, good. We finally got here. I knew we were going to get here. Now I've got to make it all happen.
Okay. Moving forward, obviously, I mean, Bellator has just gone from strength to strength to strength. And obviously one of the biggest things that we've seen this year is, you know, Bellator's moved over to Spike TV. Do you mind telling us how that came about?
Yeah. The way it came about was we, at the time, we were working with Fox Sports Network. We had a multiple event deal in the United States with Fox Sports Network. And I do an awful lot of due diligence and investigation. So I was tracking the industry. And if you track the industry at the time, what you saw is that the UFC was doing an awful lot of talking about their interest in potentially moving away from Spike. They kept talking about a network deal. They kept talking about moving away from Spike. And that always seemed, that was always very surprising to me whenever I would hear it, because Spike was the home to MMA. Spike was where MMA fans lived. Spike had done more MMA events, higher rated MMA events, farther reaching MMA events than anyone in the history of mixed martial arts television. And so when I started repeatedly hearing those comments from the leadership of the UFC, I started very quickly planting the seeds with people that I knew at Viacom and at MTV Networks at the time to get into meetings with the people that were controlling Spike to talk to them about an alternative, which was Bellator. And at the same time, we were working with Fox Sports Network. So it was a period where I looked at an opportunity and I said to myself, wow, if these two groups actually split, if Spike and the UFC actually go in separate ways, there's going to be an incredible opportunity here for someone to fill that gap and to become partners with Spike and to build out an enormous mixed martial arts company in partnership with Spike. So that was the genesis of it, and I just started planning those meetings, and I eventually got those meetings set with ad sales folks and top leadership at Spike, top leadership in terms of sales at MTV Networks, and eventually with Kevin Kay at Spike, and just started putting the wheels in motion. But it was a matter of looking at the industry and saying to myself, wow, that is the greatest television alliance I've ever seen in the history of mixed martial arts. And if somebody is ready to move away from that, if somebody's going to head in a different direction, where I want to be poised to be able to take over that spot.
Obviously, that's worked. Can you tell me what effect that move had on not just the brand of Bellator, but also on its fighters?
Oh, I mean, the impact that move had has been enormous. I mean, look, if you're an MMA fan in the United States and you've tracked this game, the vast majority of fans here call Spike, their home for MMA. The vast majority of fans here identify Spike as the place they go for their MMA content. They know the space. They know the marketing, promotion, production, publicity, and advertising behind MMA better than anybody. They know our consumer base and our demographic better than anybody. They know how to recruit sponsorship and advertisers in the space better than anybody. They know how to get those advertisers, how to activate better than anybody. It's had tremendous impact on Bellator, because right now, with Viacom taking an ownership stake in Bellator, and with Spike really being a partner to my company, I'm able to call Kevin Kay or John Slusser or Neil Sherman and these top executives at Spike on a regular basis and ask them for their input, suggestions, ideas, personnel. I mean, I've literally got, a who's who of the most talented people in the history of this game that I can call on their cell phone and say, hey, what would you recommend we do about this? Do you have any ideas on how we can make this better or more entertaining or more exciting? So it's been an amazing benefit to the brand and to putting on better shows.
And obviously, we've certainly seen that this year. Okay, moving forward, do you see Bellator eventually moving on to pay-per-view?
Yeah, absolutely. The issue is just timing, and fights fuel pay-per-view. Marketing doesn't fuel pay-per-view. Marketing helps you get more people to buy a pay-per-view, but the essence of pay-per-view success is based on fights and fighters. So as soon as those fights and fighters are in place to do a pay-per-view, we're poised and ready to do it. We've got the relationships in place with all of the necessary parties, all of the necessary distributors. We've got all the advertising support and promotional support that is needed. And we've also got a series of people working with us on a day-to-day basis who understand exactly how to orchestrate pay-per-view. It's just a matter of the right fights being in place. And as soon as those right fights are in place and locked in, we'll be in position to pull that trigger in very, very short notice.
That was going to be my next question, is there any timescales, but you've already answered that. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to some pressing issues. These are all relevant news that have, say within the last couple of months. And these are kind of, I've rounded these questions up off other MMA fans like myself. So first question then, obviously recently there was quite a lot of cuts from the UFC, and you made a statement that you did not want to sign John Fitch. Could you explain why you didn't want to sign one of the top welterweights in the world?
It wasn't a matter of as much of not wanting to sign Fitch. I've got a lot of respect for Fitch. He's a very talented fighter. He fights at a very, very high level. He can compete with anybody in the world. The issue was really just about, with the UFC making cut after cut after cut, and they've now made 50, and they're planning on making 100 more. The last time I saw, they're cutting a lot of fighters. We have been out over the last 2 years actively signing what I believe are some of the greatest potential prospects in the world. Guys who are going to be the next Pat Curran and the next Eduardo Dantas and the next Michael Chandler and the next Ben Askren and the next Alexander Shlemenko. So all of those guys are in line right now. And all of those guys are part of a developmental process that gave rise to us developing some of the greatest fighters on the face of the earth. So what I want to do right now is I want to stay true to what has made Bellator Bellator. I want to keep developing that next level of stars. I want to keep developing those next breakout fighters in the world of mixed martial arts. I mean, look, if everybody in the world at 145 pounds started fighting right now, most people would agree that Jose Aldo and Pat Curran would be the last two guys standing. If you asked people 2 years ago who Pat Curran was, very few people could tell you, even in the MMA space. So that's what our model allows us to do. And we've got so many talented fighters right now at 170 pounds. We've got so many guys coming up in those divisions that, we want to be true to them, and we want to be true to that developmental process. I mean, there may be some guys that we sign in select weight divisions who have been cut from any organization in the world. But at this point, it just didn't make sense to start bringing guys in and leapfrogging over some of these incredibly talented fighters that we've got signed right now.
It's a very valid point. As a fan, how much would you like to have seen Ben Askren versus John Fitch?
Well, I think Fitch Askren would be a very, very interesting fight. I mean, look, you've got to be a hardcore fan to have your eyes on that fight. But look, I love watching Askren fight, and I know that there are a lot of people who don't. I know that there are a lot of people who don't like Ben's style, and I have all due respect for them. But I like watching Askren fight. I'm a purist when it comes to this game, so if you don't like the double leg and you don't like the takedown and Ben's ground and pound, then stop him from taking you down. That's why they call it a fight. So I think, a Fitch Askren fight would be a very interesting fight for those of us who are in the game, who are purists, who appreciate, the elements of the game that Ben Askren and a Fitch bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you say about Ben Askren, and I think anyone who can criticise Ben Askren after his performances, especially his last performance against Kyle Amasu, I don't think they really understand what MMA is about. Personally, that's just my own opinion. Okay, moving off that subject for a little bit then, moving on to another subject. Obviously, one of the things that stands out about Bellator is how frequent your events are. I mean, in most cases, you've got an event on a weekly basis. Do you feel you can continue to put such a high level of shows on such a regular basis?
Yeah, without question. I know we can. And the reason is that, look, the fuel to this machine is the fighters. The fuel to this machine is the quality level of the fighters that my talent development team puts into these tournaments. The television production is going to keep getting sharper and better. The features and the stories behind the fighters are going to get bigger and more elaborate and more entertaining and tighter. The in-house show is going to improve on an event-by-event basis. 3 of our last 4 events have been sold out here in the U.S. It looks like our main event coming up in a week and a half is going to be sold out. So everything is moving in the right direction. But the fuel to everything we do is the fighters. And to be able to continue to put on, look, we've done 92 shows now since we kicked off in 2009. The ability to put on the shows, the coordination operationally, the movement, the production, the satellite feeds, the worldwide distribution, that's all second hand right now. We can do all of that, and we have a great team on board that makes all of that happen. The key to it is keeping the funnel of incredibly talented fighters moving through Bellator. And that is something that, that my team has done an amazing job at. I mean, these tournaments just keep getting deeper and deeper. And, look, I mean, here's a perfect example. Our 205 tournament that's going on right now. Going into that tournament, if you'd asked 100 MMA fans who's going to end up in the finals, they would have said, I can't wait to see Mo fight Babalu. I don't think that many people would have said, I can't wait to see Newton fight Zayats. But that's how it ended up. Zayats knocks out Babalu in the very first round with a spinning back fist and ground and pound, and Emmanuel Newton pulls off an amazing spinning back fist that knocks out King Mo. It just speaks to the strength of the guys that we're recruiting in the development process. So, it's just, that's what makes the tournament format so cool, is that at any given moment, a guy that you've never heard of can become a guy that ends up on Sports Center and ends up in the middle of the sports section because of the amazing fight and the amazing moment he created. So, it's about those guys, and that funnel of great fighters is just getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
I've got to say, I was screaming when I saw that back fist from Newton over King Mo. I don't think anyone you can't script stuff like that. I don't think anyone could see that coming.
I completely agree. I mean, it was shocking. I mean, when it happened and he started to fall, you could just hear it just got deathly quiet for a split second in the arena, and then the whole place just erupted.
Oh, it was amazing. I wanted to ask you some questions about the tournament, actually, because that is another thing that stands Bellator out. Is the tournament, and obviously you've kind of answered my question a little bit there, but I'm going to go through. I've got a couple of questions around the tournament. So the first one is: do you worry about the repetitiveness of the tournaments? For example, in the welterweight final, you've got Ben Saunders versus Douglas Lima, and we know they've matched before.
Yeah, that's a unique situation. I mean, that one is kind of an anomaly. I had anticipated that this welterweight tournament was going to be the deepest one we'd ever done because, John got out of prison and was going to come back, and his training was going really good. And of course, we'd signed Daley, and I was hoping Daley came over. Well, John ends up tearing his knee out, stuffing a takedown, so he's out. And then Daley ends up getting in trouble with the law and can't come over to the States, so then he was out. So it went from having 2 really talented new big personalities that have knockout power in the welterweight tournament to complement Lima and Saunders to being a situation where you had, Lima and Saunders as your number 1 and number 2, and they ended up winning it. So, that was disappointing. But, unfortunately, as the UFC has seen all too often recently, is that injuries happen. Injuries and legal issues are going to come up. And, unfortunately for Paul, those came up. And then unfortunately for John, he ended up blowing out his knees. So, we just, we got to regroup and plug the next guys in. And hopefully by the next time we do a welterweight tournament, Paul's legal situation will be handled and John's knee will be fine. And, the loser of Lima versus Saunders will be in. And then we'll have, probably 5 new faces that'll light things up and shock people the way, the Emmanuel Newtons of the world have.
I've got to say, I'm a massive fan of Douglas Lima. I interviewed him just before the tournament started, and he's such an exciting fighter. I mean, he literally comes to finish fights, and as a fan, that's what you want to see.
Oh yeah, I love the guy. Look, we signed Lima out of Canada, and at the time he was the number one prospect in the world at 170 pounds. And man, has he lived up to that billing. I mean, the only fight that he's ever had for us that wasn't just electrifying was, the Askren fight. And he, like everybody else, has got to work on his takedown defense and see what he can do if he gets another shot. But every other fight that he's had for us, it's just been highlight reel stuff.
Yeah, I love watching him fight. Again, another question with regards to your tournament, because the tournaments there's no doubt, the tournaments are fantastic. And, it's obviously done over a space of a few months. And it just works brilliantly. And it does get you excited for the first round, the next round, and of course then lead up to the final. Have you considered expanding the tournaments from 8 to 16?
I haven't really ever thought about expanding it upwards. We've given some consideration to a few different kind of tweaks on the tournament format, but the magic of what we do is that you can get a tournament started, the middle point and the end within a 3-month period. And, television typically runs on 10 to 12 episode cycles. So, when you look at the NFL in their regular season, when you look at, when you look at most programming on TV, it typically runs very effectively over 10 to 12 weeks. So when we were creating the seasonal format, it was like, okay, what can I do in a 90-day period where we give fighters enough time so that they can, barring a bad cut or an injury, that they can recuperate and they can come back and fight again. 16 would elongate that, and then what you'd create is kind of that old school Dream and Pride Grand Prix feel to it, and it wouldn't be able to be encapsulated in that condensed period where you could watch the beginning, middle, and the end. And that's why we decided on 8.
That's fair enough. And I think one of you talked there about the Grand Prix, especially in Pride, and they were good, and there were some classics. But I think one of the things that let it down a little bit was them having the semi-finals and the final in the same night. Because I think that the days of having multiple fights in one night, I think that's gone now, and I think the sport's better for it as well.
Oh, I completely agree. And the evolution of fighters that evolution has been so substantial that, people ask me about what are we looking at today versus 5 or 10 years ago in terms of, the top level fighters, and what will we be looking at 5 years from now? And I always point to, if you're a fan of the NBA and you look at the NBA from 20 years ago or 25 years ago, and you remember Jerry West playing in the NBA with his short shorts and his jump shot, his two-handed jump shot. And then you look at the NBA fast forward 25 years and you look at Michael Jordan or LeBron James, and that evolution is so substantial. The athleticism and the speed and the power and the aggression is so much more advanced. I think that's what you see today versus even 5 to 10 years ago in the MMA space. There was a time when one overwhelming proficiency at one art could get you through. Hoist Gracie could beat guys just because they didn't know how to defend against his jiu-jitsu game. But today that's all over. Everybody's got everything. They've got a great clinch game. They've got a great rubber guard. They've got great takedowns. They've got great takedown defense. They've got great, they've got great kicks. Every piece of the game is refined. So to try to do multiple fights in one night now, it couldn't happen the way it did in the past.
Yeah, I don't think people want to see that anymore. Anyway, I mean, you want fighters as much as possible, as close to 100% as possible when they fight, and that's not going to happen on fighting multiple times in a night. Moving on then to another topic, there was a lot made about the UFC Hall of Famer Randy Couture, a personal idol of mine, and his role with Bellator. Can you confirm exactly what his role is?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a huge Randy fan, have been for many years. I mean, if you're a fan of MMA, you're a fan of Randy. He's done amazing things for and in the game. At this point, Randy's role with Bellator is as one of 4 hugely talented coaches on the Bellator reality show, Fightmaster. I mean, he's just he's an incredible talent, and he complements. Frank Shamrock is a bigger than life personality. Joe Warren is just electrifying on the show. Greg Jackson is, the consummate coach in mixed martial arts. So you've got all these great personalities, and Randy's role is really that of Randy. Randy the coach, Randy sharing his expertise and everything he knows about the game with these fighters that are trying to earn their way into a Bellator tournament. So that is Randy's role with Bellator.
Okay, moving on again to another topic. Obviously, there's a lot of news. There's been a lot of news about Eddie Alvarez. Can you tell us any more about his situation?
Gosh, not a lot to report. I still remain very, very hopeful that there's a way to settle the dispute that exists between Ed and the company. I'm hopeful. I mean, a bad settlement is better than a good litigation 100% of the time. The reality is that, we're hopeful it can get settled. I hope Ed and his team are hopeful it can get settled. I know I've instructed our attorneys to keep a constant dialogue going with them to try to figure out a way to get this thing worked out. We'll see. I mean, it's a hard one to bet on one way or another, but I'm still pretty hopeful that there's going to be a way to get this thing worked out and get him back into the cage.
Okay, we touched on this briefly already, but any more news on the UK's Paul Daley?
No, we've been in pretty constant. Paul's a good emailer, and Paul and I are in email communication on a pretty regular basis. He's, he's in a tough spot. He can't, because of his legal status and his legal situation right now in the UK, he cannot get into the United States. And the most recent reports we've heard is that there'll be some more findings and updates in and around the late April timeframe. And, we just remain very hopeful that situation gets resolved and he's able to come back and get back over here and fight. We had one performance for Bellator as part of our new long-term multi-year worldwide exclusive, and we've let him fight outside of the agreement now to try to, allow him to continue making money while he fights his legal situation. And, hopefully that works itself out without the worst case scenario occurring,
Again, we touched on this briefly as well, but any more news on War Machine's injury, and when should we hopefully see him in the Bellator cage?
I saw John last Thursday at the show we just did in Southern California. He looked good. He was in good shape. John always wants to push the envelope, but, I had a kind of a sit down with him and I said, look, it doesn't help you and it doesn't help us if you force the issue and come back too soon and re-injure the knee. I know you want to fight. I know you want to get back in, and I know this sucks, but take the time you need and get well. And if you need some help from me financially, I'm happy to give it to you, but just take the time you need to make sure that the knee is 110%, not 80%. So, John and I, say what you will about John. John and I have always had a pretty good ability to communicate. And, he understood what I was saying, and he's going to focus on getting the knee back 120%. And, we're going to look to try to see if there's a way when that knee is 100% back to get him to get him back in business maybe around the June or July timeframe.
Oh, that sounds good. I mean, we spoke to John at the start of the year as well, and he was so excited to be back to be back fighting, and it was such a big promotion. I know he must have been devastated when it fell through with his injury, which is, like you say, it's part of the game, unfortunately, which is just a horrible part of the game. Now, I'm coming close to wrap up. It's been amazing speaking to you. I really appreciate you giving me your time.
Sure.
And I've got to put this to you. Obviously, I'm in the UK, so MMA is booming in the UK, and we've seen a good few UK fighters in Bellator. We've already talked about Paul Daley, of course. We've got Running Man. I know we've got Michael Page coming up soon as well. Have you got any more plans for any more UK guys in the near future?
Oh yeah, my team is actively out there recruiting and trying to sign another handful of UK-based fighters that we think can have incredible potential. I mean, you mentioned Michael Page. He's got just an unlimited amount of potential to do incredible things inside the Bellator cage on Spike and worldwide. He's wicked talent. So we've got a lot of guys that we've earmarked and guys that we're talking to right now, and I think it's safe to say that within the next 3 to 5 months, you'll see a number of additional signings out of the UK for Bellator on long-term worldwide exclusive agreements.
Also, finally, this is more of a comment, but again, as a huge mixed martial arts fan, as a huge Bellator fan, when are we going to see Bellator on TV in the UK?
Well, I get literally more Twitter questions about that than maybe any other issue. And honestly, I have legitimately apologized for it many times. My team has just not pulled the trigger and just not done the job in terms of getting a TV deal done for the company in the UK. I want very badly for Bellator to be on live in the UK every, Thursday night, early Friday morning, and then on replays. It's incumbent on my team to get the deal done. They haven't pulled the trigger yet. It's our fault, and I'm doing everything humanly possible to try to solve it. I want it to happen worse than anybody, and it's something we've got to get done. But I want UK fans to understand that I want it to happen very, very badly. My team just hasn't been able to make it happen yet, but I'm on top of them trying to get them to do it.
Well, I for one I can't wait to see that happen. I really appreciate your time today, Bjorn. It's been an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you. So thank you very much for giving me your time.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I look forward to talking to you again.